Welcome, everyone. For those joining, and I know we'll have a few that are joining throughout the process, thanks for dialing in. Really appreciate it. My name's Selwyn Button. I'm the chair of the Lowitja Institute. I'm a Goongarri man from Western Queensland. I'm joining you from Ngunnawal country today. And on behalf of the Lowitja Institute, I want to welcome you all and thank you for joining us for this webinar today. We're really excited to be able to, certainly in the last couple of weeks before October 14, to be able to host this webinar and to make sure at least we're providing information to everyone and giving them an insight into, I guess, some of those things that the Lowitja Institute feels are important to understand leading into October 14. Today's webinar is Why a Voice Matters for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Health. And today we'll be yarning about the whole process of having a constitutionally enshrined Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander voice, and the strong foundations for urgent work that's needed to improve health outcomes for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, and why a voice matters in that process as well. We'll hear from some pretty cool speakers, and we've got some great people that you'll see online. We'll have Aunty Anderson that'll join us. We'll have Janine, Adjunct Professor Janine Mohamed. We'll have Tarneen Onus Browne also talk, and Dr. Mark Wenitong. So can I start by acknowledging country? As I mentioned, I'm here on Ngunnawal country, and I want to pay respects to their ancestors and their custodianship of this country that they've cared for thousands of years. I want to acknowledge country where everyone is located around the place. And for those joining us from right across the country, I'd actually ask you to share where you are and to acknowledge the country that you're on and put it in the chat, so at least we can see, I guess, the depth and breadth of country that we're touching today on this webinar. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things for us. This event, as you know, it's through the Zoom webinar, so all of you, everyone's automatically muted. We want to encourage everyone, though, to pop questions into the chat, because we will have a Q&A, and we want to make sure that everyone gets the opportunity to do that. Just to let everyone know that this is actually being recorded as well, because we do intend to put this out into the public on the Lowitja Institute website, and we use excerpts of this through our social media channels around the place as well. If you've got any issues, technical issues particularly, just as you can see on the screen, shoot a quick email to our comms team, and they'll try and help you and work out what we can do throughout the process. We've only got a short time together today, so we want to get into it, and we want to make sure that we give enough time for everyone to get their questions. We may not get to everyone's questions, so I apologise in advance if your question's not answered, but we want to make sure we give plenty of opportunity and time for that as well. And as I said, it's certainly focusing on making sure you get those things in the chat function early. The referendum is fast approaching. As I mentioned, 14 October, it's only a few weeks away now, and certainly we're seeing conversations about the referendum ramp up, conversations about the voice, what it means, what it all looks like. Those things are happening. The live debates are happening now. The live conversations are happening now, and will continue right up until the day of the referendum. It is a tough time for a lot of our people out there. And so in saying that, we want to make sure that people are actually looking after themselves, looking after their family, and looking after their community. There's plenty of stuff that's going on, as many of you have seen in the public, and there's plenty of nastiness and misinformation and disinformation that does happen. What we're wanting to do here today is to provide an opportunity to have some conversations about factual information. But knowing that those things are occurring, we do encourage you all to look after yourselves in this process. And we do encourage you all to make sure that you've got someone that you can talk to and family members that you can lean on as the debate, as we get closer to the referendum date, because certainly, as we're seeing this stuff, the misinformation, the nastiness, the vitriol isn't going to stop anytime soon. But we want to make sure at least we're trying to have a respectful conversation about where things are going. So certainly take care of each other. Now, with all those sorts of things out of the way, we want quick information about the Lowitja Institute. As many of you would be aware, it is the only national Aboriginal community controlled research institute. We won't go into detail about the institute itself, but our work is very much built on those key principles of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander leadership. It's our broader understanding of health and which incorporates wellbeing, and the need for that work to have a positive impact in our community and make sure that the work that we're doing is translatable and that mob can pick it up and start implementing those things that come out of our research pretty much as soon as the work. We do take our purpose from our patron, who's on the screen, Dr. Lowitja, who's been an absolute champion in this space for many years. And many of you are very much aware of Aunty Lowitja's work and her life and what she's done and achieved, and her outstanding contributions to our communities right across the country. And so for us, we pay homage to that by ensuring that we can continue to drive her narrative around improving Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander health research across the country. What we will do now is to share some words from Aunty Lowitja from the 2016 Lowitja Conference that we held in Melbourne, which goes to the heart of, I guess, what we're discussing today, allowing her to share her views.
We must be fearless in our work for the health and the well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We must be fearless in our work for the Indigenous peoples of the world over. Now is the time that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people must take their rightful place at the heart of this nation.
Hello everyone.
We started going to the next piece, but before we do that, I will give a quick introduction. We are honoured to be led by Dr. Lowitja O'Donoghue, Aunty Lowitja, and we're honoured to carry her name. But we also have had the privilege and honour of being an organisation that's been led by Aunty Pat Anderson for many years, and who has been our chair and is also now our co-patron. She's an Uluru woman who's known nationally and internationally as an advocate for the rights and health of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people. She's got extensive experience in Aboriginal health, community development, policy information, research ethics. She was the co-chair of the Referendum Council that released its final report in 2017, and has since led the work of the Uluru Dialogue in partnership with the University of New South Wales Indigenous Law Centre. We now will share a video of Aunty Pat speaking about the opportunities that the voice represents for us on October 14.
Hello everyone. Thank you for coming on to this webinar to have a discussion, a conversation about the importance of the voice. You know, for all of us, those of us over 18, this is probably going to be one of the most important decisions that we're going to make. It's time for reflection, and it will tell us what kind of people we are in Australia. What do we stand for, and what are our values? At the cusp of all of this, at the centre rather of all of this, is why we need a voice to Parliament and to the executive. I think everybody agrees that what we've been doing, we meaning the government and us, all of us involved as well, and we work so hard in our organisations and what have you, hasn't really worked. Now, we the receivers of failed and expensive policies know this, and we have always known this. So we have spent many generations trying to work out a way where we might be actually heard and listened to and accepted that we have solutions to our own issues and our own problems. What's been happening, you know, it's a universal truism, of course, and many of you will know this, that you get the best decisions when you involve the people that you're making those decisions for. You will get better decisions, you will get better government, and you'll get more targeted resources, which is what we really need. Our disadvantage and our needs are not decreasing, they are in fact increasing. So there has to be a circuit breaker here. And this is what's on the table. This is a gift to you, a gift to all of us, to all Australians, wherever we live, whoever we are. It's a gift of hope, it's a gift of healing, and dare I say it, a gift of love. We're asking you to walk with us for a better future for the whole of the country. We cannot live in the conditions that we are living on now. You know all the health statistics better than me. Kids not going to school. We're torturing 10-year-old boys, for goodness sake. You know, all of this there has to be a better way. And the better way is really simple, is to involve us in all the decisions and policies that are made about us. It's not very hard. Now, that's what's on the table, including that once and for all, we will be recognised and being part of Australian society and part of the body politic and working as part of who we all are. At the moment, we're sort of on the side here a little bit. Despite all our achievements, there is still so much to do, and what's on the table, as I've said just a minute ago, is a guide, a way forward, and it's very simple. All we're asking for is to be included in all the decisions and policies and laws that are made about us, and we will get, as I said, much better decisions and much better targeted resources. Our needs are increasing, as I said, and we can't keep going along the way that we are. I would ask you, try to cut out the noise. There's a lot of noise out there, and you all know what I'm talking about. But this audience, I think, also knows what the relationship in between good health and a good society and happy people. You know better than anybody out there. So talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to the no voters that you know, and try to influence, at least think about what it is that's being proposed and the difference that it will make to all of us as a country. And it will unify. It's not divisive at all. You know, it's a bit disingenuous to talk to us about this is also saying that it's based on racism rather, and that it will be divisive. Well, you know, many of us grew up in Australia. We grew up in segregated towns, for goodness sake. And hello, Lowitja has done a report on the effects of racism. It's a bit old now. It was a survey, 400 people up around Shep, and it was very clear empirically that indeed racism makes us sick. So Australia, come on, we can do better than this. So I'm urging you, think carefully. You know, when you go into that polling booth on the 14th on Saturday, there's just you and your conscience, and you have to make the decision there and then. But I ask you to make an informed decision and take responsibility for how you vote. There is a real opportunity here to make real change to who we are and make us all a better country, a much more empathetic, much kinder, and one that really wants to truly embrace us. It was heartbreaking for Megan and I doing all the dialogues, and most of the meetings, people said to us, why don't they want to know about us? What are they afraid of? Don't they want to understand about us? Don't they want to know us? Here's an opportunity. Let's close the division and let's narrow down all the negativity. There's a real opportunity here. Let's not blow it. Vote yes on the 14th of October. And thank you for coming to the webinar. And thank Lowitja for putting it on, for Janine and the team. They've done a whole lot of work on this, including getting me to make this recording for you today. So take care, everybody. Stay safe. Stay safe. Thank you.
And while Aunty Pat couldn't join us today, we are extremely grateful for her taking the time out to record the message. As many of you guys know, she's travelling extensively around the country now over the last couple of weeks to make sure we can actually inform the public and inform the Australian public about the need for voice. We are very proud to support her in the work that she's been doing and her vision to see the Uluru Statement from the heart enacted in full. Part of which is the establishment, the first part is the establishment of the Voice to Parliament, which is why we're going to the polls, why we're going to, I guess, to the referendum on October 14. And the Uluru Statement from the Heart, as you mentioned, is an invitation from Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people to all Australians, an invitation to work together in creating a better future. So let's get into the panel discussion. Let's talk now about how the voice can make a difference and how it can have positive impacts on the health and well-being of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people. I want to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Adjunct Professor Janine Mohamed. Janine's a proud Narungga and Kaurna woman from South Australia and the CEO of the Lowitja Institute. For more than 20 years, Janine has worked in nursing, management, research, policy and workforce development in the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander health sector. Many of those years has been spent in Aboriginal community-controlled health sector at state, national and international levels. I now invite Janine to tell us a bit more about herself and tell us why she thinks a voice matters for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander health.
Thanks, Ellen. Of course, I'd like to begin by paying my respects to the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, on whose lands I get to live, work and play here on Naarm. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and future emerging generations. And of course, I want to just say my deep love and respect for Aunty Pat. I'm sure it didn't go unnoticed that she was actually coming to us from a hotel room, which has really been her home, jumping from one hotel to the next over the last 4 years. That we know that firsthand here at the Lowitja Institute, the hard work and love that she puts in for the betterment of our community's advancement. I also want to acknowledge the work of volunteers in this campaign. We had a beautiful start to our morning with Minister Browne here in Collingwood, and many of the volunteers turned out. So thank you. And I want to also acknowledge that for me, and I'm sure for many of you, this referendum is an extremely exciting time, full of great trepidation for the 14th of October, but it's also been what I describe as a racially gaslighting experience. And I've asked the team to put up a slide later just to, dip our toe into really what that is as a term, because I find, like with much of this campaign, education is the key. And I think it really puts a framework around what a lot of us have been experiencing through the vitriol. And of course, racial gaslighting as an experience has negative health impacts for us, and it leads to, of course, a negative health impact on our social and emotional wellbeing as Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people. I want to say thank you for joining us today. It's been wonderful to sit here and watch over 200 of you join us online and tell us what country you're coming to, and come online in a very busy time for everyone, as we're only, as has already been said, we're only days away from a very important decision in our collective history. Can I say up front that a voice matters absolutely for Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander health, and it matters to me on so many levels. And today, our panel is made up of people with different experiences and intersectionalities, but mine is as an Aboriginal woman, and as a mama to my 5 children, as a healthcare professional, of course, as the CEO of this amazing organisation, of a transformational Aboriginal community-controlled health research organisation, with a trusted voice, we've been on record a number of times for the amazing evidence that we produce, and Aunty Pat's mentioned a few of those, amazing publications that the Lowitja Institute has been able to produce alongside our fantastic membership of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander health researchers and our allies. I'm also a proud member of a community that has fought for so long, literally, to have a voice in this country, and to have a voice in all the policies and laws that affect us. And we're going to be talking a little bit today about that. But I just wanted to, and it's going to come up in the chat, highlight one of our publications. If you're interested in reading it, it's called Legally Invisible, and it's a perfect example of our work in this space. And it really does worry and hurt me, as I'm sure it does many of you, that there's opposition, coming from many sides to the voice. So first up, I'd like to stress that we know at Lowitja Institute that 80% at least of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people support the voice. I know out there it doesn't look like that very often because of the way division can be highlighted, the voices that media chooses to hear from, the way that social media floods us with the algorithms and algorithms that are absolutely paid for. So it pained me deeply to have, just on the weekend, non-Indigenous friends telling me, meeting with me and having coffees because, I'm in that process of, calling a relo to have a conversation about, the voice. I'm also putting myself out there and having brave conversations with people that want to have a yarn. But they're telling me that they're worried that they're actually going to be doing something wrong by voting yes, that they don't want to do the wrong thing by the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander community. And I shared with them our statistics that 80% of us want this to get across the line. And I also shared with them that there's no progressive no. There's no option of that on the ballot paper. It's either a yes or no. And I shared with them that if you're thinking about voting no, I'd like you to think about who you're lining up with in ticking that no box. I deeply and completely understand that a lot of our mob don't trust governments. As Aunty Pat said, we've been let down too many times. But I do trust our people, and I have deep faith that when our people are at the table, we will see improvement in many outcomes, that we currently experience. Because we know, I think, and this is what underscores a lot of my choice to vote yes, is that when Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people are in the design, the development and the delivery, and of course the evaluation of policies and programs, that they actually work. As opposed to, what we have experienced, which is a one-size-fits-all policy being imposed upon us by governments who think they know what's best for us. And what the other results and byproducts of that is that we end up wasting everyone's time and everyone's money. And I'm confident also in all the work that has come before us, leaders in our community calling for such a structure over many decades. And I'll highlight a couple of those. We have leaders like William Cooper here from Victoria, David Unipen from my own country over in South Australia, Charlie Perkins, and I hope you heard the Charlie Perkins lecture the other night. It was amazing. From Yolngu community, we have the paperbark petition that was taken to Parliament, and of course our very own namesakes, and that's our patron, Aunty Lowitja and Aunty Pat Anderson. As you saw, Aunty Pat Anderson has been central to the Uluru dialogues. They have, and you're welcome to read it on their website. They've laid out the principles behind if it's a yes outcome, the voice structure, that it'll be independent, it'll be selected by us, led by us, and that it will reflect our diversity. Of course, like anything, it's going to have its limitations. Of course, there will be disappointments. We live in a colonised nation, but I believe that it is a step forward for our nation, for our movement, and an absolute step forward for improving our health outcomes. Thank you, Selwyn.
Thanks, Janine. Certainly appreciate that and appreciate your opening comments and your honesty. And that's certainly what we're wanting to make sure as we do very often within our own mob. The conversation we have with our own, very honest. And that's, I guess, the best that we can do here is be honest in this whole discussion leading up to October 14. Just want to remind people very quickly, if you are wanting to ask questions, there are two functions at the bottom of the screen. One's a Q&A function, one's a chat function. If you want to ask questions of the panelists, can you please put them into the Q&A function, not the chat function, because then it enables us to, I guess those that are administering the process, enables us to then, I guess, distill between the two. So much easier if you're asking questions, throw them in the Q&A function. So thanks. Our next speaker, our next panelist is Dr. Mark Wenitong. Dr. Mark is a Kabi Kabi man from South Queensland and also has South Sea Island heritage. He's a strategic advisor to the Lowitja Institute, an adjunct professor at the Queensland University of Technology in the School of Exercise and Nutrition Sciences, and the inaugural co-chair of Queensland Health Statewide Clinical Network. Dr. Mark, as many of you guys know, has decades of experience in clinical governance and strategic primary healthcare planning and policy. We're really lucky to have Dr. Mark join us today, and I want to hand over to you to say a few words as well.
Thanks, Alan. And you promised to sing us a Barry White song earlier. I'm still going to wait for that, brother. But hey, look, welcome everybody. And look, I wanted to give you some insights from my perspective, which is really from macro policy through to remote service delivery, in the work that I've been doing for the last 20 years. And please don't take some of what I say as a critique of consultants or academics or public servants or politicians. It's about policy and systems. So this is the most exciting thing I've seen in the last 20 years. And I'm talking here about strategy and structure and the perspective of a pre-policy input to the voice, via a voice, which is real co-design. And it's got much more potential than the current. So when I'm voting as much with my brain as with my heart. I think comments will this solve domestic violence just populist and stupid? But having said that, it's a coherent avenue to really ensure evidence-based approaches to DV, like ACEs and allostatic load, and that those kind of programs are funded and implemented, and it's got a much better chance of addressing DV than the current way we do things. Don't forget that this isn't just about a deficit approach for us, but we've got a lot to contribute to a better Australian society and health systems. Our primary healthcare models are the best international practice in the world. So we've got a lot to contribute as well. Why can't government just do it without a voice? Well, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing. Well, it's not a DSM definition, but the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, hoping it will make a difference. No, and partly it's because it's just not the way that government works. The government works in certain ways, siloed ways, portfolio ways, and it's comfortable with that because it works for mainstream and the status quo. It just doesn't work that well for us, and hasn't, in my experience, in the last 20 years. What about the committees that I sit on? And I've sat on almost every national health committee that there is. And they're great. Look, don't get me wrong, we get stuff done. Generally, though, we work with a bunch of great government people who have no authority to make any decision for about 3 years, and then the work finishes. Generally, terms of reference are already scoped in, and they're often more of a response than a voice, really. Have we got exemplars? Yeah, look, I think the National COVID Task Force is something that we should really have a good look at. The federal government listened to us. We had direct input from communities, public health, right through, straight to federal government. For those that are wondering whether these kind of national kind of bodies can influence practice, they certainly can, and that certainly did. Direct service provision, the Biosecurity Act, we had more access to point of care testing on the ground, we had workforce increases on the ground, harmonisers of evidence-based approaches. We had no deaths for 18 months, which was almost miraculous. But these things can work if government listens and if it's done in the right way. I think there's some unexemplary models around as well, and it's kind of talking to those that think we already have a voice. We don't. It's a little bit naive to think we actually have a voice. I mean, I just think about things like the IAS funding under Scullion, and I'm pretty sure if we had a voice, the funding would have happened a lot differently than it did in that particular instance. And this isn't a problem with NIAA. This is because it sits within a higher level system, and that's where we need the voice. Sustained and consistent input over time. This constitutional stuff is really, really important. The last National Indigenous Health Council I sat on, Ian Anderson chaired it. We had about 2 years of good work, really evidence-based implementation ready to go. And the last meeting was trying to figure out how, because the government changed, and the health minister was in the room with us actually, but she got rolled as well. So the last meeting was trying to figure out how to hand this over to somebody to continue the progression. And of course, there was no one, and it never got taken on any further. And that's been the story with all of the national committees that I've sat on. Do we have current voices? Yeah. So currently, like, there's advisors, there's consultants, and we can pay, a consultant another $500,000 to ask the same stupid questions that the last mob asked. And then they end up with a sterilised report because it's in scope according to the contract, of course. The public service has to kind of further sterilise it a bit to suit the government of the day. If they've got any career options in the future, they have to do that. Good way. But it's really owned by government, those kind of reports. It's not like peer-reviewed research. The problem is, of course, research costs just as much and takes twice as long, and half the researchers have never lived in a remote community anyway. And the chances of getting it picked up are just as low. So if you think evidence-based and things like that, progress policy, think again, it's ideology and champions more that do that. The other things that we've had in the past that with people have conflated with voice of regional health forums, in my experience, it might have worked in some jurisdictions, but the ones that I sat on, nobody ever turned up with any authority to sign off on anything except for the Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Services. No one puts their cards on the table because we're all competing for the same funding that sit on those kind of things. So they don't work unless they sit within a higher level arrangement, and that's what a voice would do. Most people would understand that jurisdictional level was most health policy hits the ground, and can this structure influence that? Well, yeah, there's a number of ways it can do that, not in the least through our national health reform agreements, but as well, so things like national accreditation for remote health services like Dumaji come from a national body, and we can influence that as well. Effectiveness and cost effectiveness. Here's the thought: instead of paying $500,000 for a consultant to go and ask, or a researcher to go and ask somebody, just ask Uncle Craig from Arakoon to come to Canberra and give some direct invoice for $50 TA. That'll be a lot cheaper. Will this kind of thing distract from treaty and sovereignty? Look, the only thing I learned from the last Prime Minister ScoMo was that they can multitask, so I don't think there's any problems there. I'll leave it there for questions later.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate that. Now we're going to bring in our next speaker, our next panelist. And I want to introduce Tarneen. Tarneen's one of our deadly young leaders that's based down in Victoria. She's a proud Wunditjmara, Bindal, Yorta Yorta and Miriam person and a community organiser for the Warriors of Aboriginal Resistance. Their work is focused on several community movements, including Black Destined Custody, Invasion Day, Justice for Elijah Dowdy, and stopping the forced closure of remote Aboriginal communities in Western Australia. I'm looking forward to hearing from Tarneen on why the referendum on a constitutionally enshrined voice to Parliament is important and what opportunities may come with it, and particularly from someone who's a young person who's been active in the community space for a long time, what this might mean and how it can actually connect to young people as well. Over to you, Tarneen.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. And thanks, Uncle Mark. Like, that last bit just cracked me up. Yeah, so I've been doing community organising over like the last nearly decade. And, you know, like I have had been like a hard no, and like campaigned against the Recognise campaign and all that kind of stuff. And I guess I didn't really realise that the Voice to Parliament was happening until over Christmas, that just gone. And I guess I was just like, what? This is actually happening. And I don't know, it made me think, like, if this is actually going to happen now, then, you know, what opportunities can we take from this? And what, like, again, also like as a self-harm mechanism as well, like what, you know, what can we do to talk about, like, and defend ourselves in a way from like the lies and the stories that are being told about us. And like for me as a black fella who's queer, I'm really sorry that the people across the road are actually demolishing the house, so you might hear some like banging. Yeah, as a black queer, you know, it's very reminiscent of the marriage equality campaign, and it just got me thinking quite a lot about, you know, what this opportunity is. And one of the things that I've kind of realised over the last, you know, couple of months is that with the marriage equality campaign, we saw that like it was about marriage, and it was about, you know, like two individuals getting married. And like there was this public poll, the plebiscite, which is, you know, different to a referendum. It's like a public poll, and people were able to vote on whether, you know, queer people could get married. And, you know, it was just like a resounding yes. I think it was like 65% of people voted that queer people could get married. But what that meant, and the flow-on effect of that meant that more governments around the country were making more progressive and better policy changes post the marriage equality campaign. So like in Victoria, for instance, you know, like there's like heaps easier for, you know, trans people to change their names and access hormones and things like that. And so those sorts of things that, you know, were much harder before. And it wasn't about equality for marriage. It's about, you know, the LGBT community as a whole. And I think that's, you know, the flow and effect of big decisions like this and big public debates and voting. It's about whether the government will commit to a community group and what sort of progressive policy changes can we see out of that. And I think that when we do build, you know, a groundswell of support, whether it is for queer people or whether it's for blackfellas, a flow-on effect of, you know, transformative policy changes happen after that. And so I think that although, you know, like everyone said here, is that the voice isn't going to fix everything. It's like not the silver bullet. It's just a step along the way. And I think it's really important that, you know, we do see it as just like a step along the way. And we know that the real work will start regardless of what the result is. We know that there'll be so much work. And if it is a yes, then it means that we can start to get the policies that we've been, you know, demanding for decades, and get those wins on the board. And so I think that's really important. And I guess like I just like wanted to say as well that, you know, we have seen that there has been a lot of deficit focus on our communities and, you know, lots of stats and things being thrown around. But I just like did want to just acknowledge the space that we're in as well. Like we're here on a panel with the Lowitja Institute, and that didn't happen by accident. Our Aboriginal community controlled organisations didn't happen because of white fellas like charity or because like they, you know, gave it to us or anything like that. It was because we fought hard and we've been fighting hard and we will continue to do that. And I think that we are such strong people and we have so much to contribute to, like, not just this country, but also we know what the solutions are for our community. And all the things that exist for blackfellas now isn't because of the governments of the day. It's because of the hard work that Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people have been putting in over the decades. And so I really want to, just make sure people remember that, because it is about us being in control of our own affairs and making decisions about what matters to us. And, you know, this country is going to vote in 2 weeks and they're making, you know, this decision without us, and it is really difficult and it is really hard. And I just think that this is, you know, a side note, I got my postal ballot paper last night, and I was just like, whoa, this is like a moment in history. So I had to take a photo with it. But it's just, you know, one of those things that we will never, I'll probably never see this again in my lifetime. So yeah, it's an important moment in history, and I really hope that, you know, we can work together to get this over the line.
Thanks, Taryn. Really appreciate that. And it is an exciting time. I've been getting texts from friends of mine who've taken photos of their postal votes, because many people who are going to be overseas and doing other things on referendum day have already registered for postal votes, so postal voting is already out there, and lots of people are excited, and that's why they're taking photos. They're taking photos of this because this has the potential to be an absolutely momentous occasion for this country. So you know, I get it, and I'll be going to a ballot box on October 14, and I'll be doing the same thing. I'll be taking a photo of it because it is something that will be a significant time in history, I think, for our country. Now we're going to get into some of the questions, and There is a question that's sitting in the Q&A chat that I wanted to talk through first. And Tarneen, you would have seen this now that you've got your postal vote. What doesn't appear on the actual ballot, on the slip that you get to vote on, is the clause, the proposed clause to be inserted into the Constitution. That full clause doesn't appear on the slip. And what's been referred to in the chat from Eddie, and thanks for the question, Eddie, is the understanding of the third component of the clause. Now, I can really quickly, there's three parts to the clause. The first part is the introductory piece, and that is just purely about the recognition of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people as the first peoples of this country. That's the introductory piece of the overall proposed clause. The second part then, and there's three subsections to it. The second part is then about being represented through a voice to Parliament. That's the subset of the overall proposal. The second part in that is then about making representations to the Parliament and to the executive government. So that's the second part. The third part is what's been thrown into the Q&A box, which is then about the power for the Australian Parliament to make the legislation about the form and function of the voice. And so what we've got there, and this goes to the conversation that's been happening across the public space about this whole notion of no detail, that third component is the detail, because it basically says we want to recognise Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people. They want a voice to Parliament. We want to make sure that they can provide representations to the government. But the way that happens and the detail around the form and function of the voice is up to the Parliament to develop through legislation. So the Parliament will develop the legislation post the referendum. Parliament's going to develop the legislation about the actual voice. So that's what that third component is. So thanks for the question, Eddie. Now I'm going to go to some other questions that we've prepared for the panelists. And the first one, I'll go to you, Janine. You've been working in healthcare for a long time. We're not going to make any, I'm not going to insinuate anything about your age. But you've got a clear picture of where the health sector is still not helping our people, or even in some cases harming our people. How do you see the voice helping change this?
So, and I'm not shy about my age at all. I'm very proud to be a 50-year-old woman, still here. There's so many ways that I think a voice will be beneficial. And I'll talk through a few, but I think there's that first part about the historical truth telling of the system, that the health system that we're currently operating in, and how it actually works. And we've got to remember the historical truth telling will remind us that we weren't involved in creating this system. We're locked out of it in actual fact. In being able to have input into how that system would benefit, and I underscore value us, as Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people. And as such, it produces statistics that tell us that we're less likely to get implants, where we get downgraded care pathways when it comes to, cardiac interventions. That's compared to our non-Indigenous counterparts. And you've already mentioned it, we've seen far too many times the tragic preventable deaths in that system. I'm sure many people online would have heard me talk about Miss Miss Naomi Williams, and seen the coroner's inquests that came back and showed, that racism was at hand. And another way, I suppose, and this is, a lived experience of mine, some time ago, about 15 years ago, actually, Selwyn, when I was working for NACHO, I advocated for cultural safety to be enshrined into national health professionals law. It was at a time when that was being harmonised. I was working on a submission for NACHO, and we urged that the Australian government look at that legislation and embed cultural safety like it had been in Aotearoa and Canada. But we were, an extremely under-resourced peak organisation at the time, being drowned out by many other well-resourced submissions who didn't share or understand our need for cultural safety and respect. So it didn't happen. Fast forward nearly 15 years later, and a group of us have finally achieved the goal of embedding cultural safety into legislation just this year, as well as accreditation systems, health practitioner standards and education. But a voice would have, if we had one in place at the time, would have led to the rise of cultural safety across our health systems much, much sooner, instead of us having to do this work sector by sector, profession by profession, workplace by workplace, which is really hard, and slow and inefficient work, when we could be doing, much more I suppose, impactful work. The voice can really create efficiencies for us. As Mark said, often the government is looking for consultation, and we're so under-resourced to be able to do that. The second is how it looks on the ground, I think, when we're able to lead. And a really amazing example of that is in the early days of the COVID pandemic, when we were 6 times less likely to contract COVID-19 than non-Indigenous people. And that's what happens. We know what's best for our mob. And I think thirdly and lastly, it's the power of being able to bring together different social and cultural determinants of health. We've seen that in climate and energy justice, and issues raised by one of our friends here at Lowitja, Uncle Norman Japarula Frank, where heat in central desert, poor housing and poverty is having absolute terrible impact, that people, to the point where people can't keep their medicines safe. So insulin can't even be kept in the fridge because the, electricity goes down, and not only are their medicines spoiled, life-saving medicines, but also their food. So food security is shocking. We saw a tweet a little while back from an Indigenous nurse, Beck Thompson, and I'll quote her, who said, "I never thought in Australia I'd have to ask parents if their power is on before, before she prescribed children's antibiotics." She explained that households were, 53 times a year for at least 8 hours without power. So that food and medicines, as I said, spoil, their kids get sicker and sicker, and parents, therefore, the case in point, at the end, parents are accused of neglect. And this isn't the experience of non-Indigenous Australia. This is our community's experience, the 3% that are trying to get our microphones out and be heard above the other 97%. And I think that this is what a voice will now speak on, raising local and regional issues, and understanding, the holistic approaches to health, the unaddressed needs that we have for the social and cultural determinants. And governments, don't pull all these pieces together and often take away with one hand to give to the other. There's not more money coming into the pot. So I think it's worthwhile pointing out too that there's overwhelming support from the health sector for the voice. This week, about 120 health and medical organisations, we signed an open letter of national support, because we know firsthand as health professionals, Mark, I'm sure you'll agree with me that we know that when, our patients are valued, trusted, when they're seen as a unique person and they have a say and are given options in their care, we have better health outcomes, no matter what the intervention is. When people are involved in their care, they have better health outcomes. Thanks, Ellen.
Thanks, Janine. And it's a good segue to Dr. Mark, someone with lots of experience in healthcare in remote communities, where we do see our mob face some of the biggest barriers to access quality services and supports. How do you see the voice making a practical difference for our brothers and sisters who live in remote areas?
I think a good example probably to use is rheumatic heart disease, and partly just because I've just done a expert review for Coronial into avoidable deaths from rheumatic heart disease in some remote communities, and look, the issue there is that the current approach is very siloed and portfolio specific. So if health's just going to continue to train more people to treat rheumatic heart disease and diagnose it, we're never going to get anywhere. Unless housing's in the room, unless education's in the room, because this has a massive effect on education as well, because as we know, school source and impetigo excludes kids from health, and overcrowding is one of the main causes of that. So what I'm envisaging is, you know, when I talk about a pre-policy input or real co-design, is community people being able to say to the minister that's in charge of remote housing as well as health, as well as education in the same room, hey, we need a coherent response to this at a community level, not just one of you doing a whole heap and the others not even understanding what's going on. So imagine being able to cohesively align remote housing priority areas where there's communities with lots of rheumatic heart disease. That's not even hard. And why can't current governments do it? Well, I don't know what the reason there is, but I do know at a national level, on health committees, we've invited remote housing into the room, but what we get is a report from a low-level policy person, not anybody that can make decisions and take back the right information anyway to make these things align. So I think in these kinds of areas, if we really want to get local cohesive policy that's joined up, that makes sense, and that can make a difference, and that's outside of health, education and housing and everything else, it needs us all to be together. And I think this is one of the only ways that we can get that kind of coherent policy input. And I think it needs to be front end, because as I was saying earlier, all of the health committees are scoped in under terms of reference around health. So we're not going to be talking about what we need to do in housing, because that's outside of our remit. And governments don't particularly work that way very well. But this is a fresh idea and a fresh way of really getting real co-design, real community input at whole of community level into policy, and making things a lot more coherent than it currently is.
Janine. So my next question is for you. If the yes vote gets up, which areas of national law and policy would you like to see the voice focusing on first? And what changes would be most important for you?
I think that making sure that we go through a consultation process, I think will be really important to make sure it is, you know, representative of lots of mob from around the country. I think like that's going to be like really important. I was on the Aboriginal Treaty Working Group in Victoria, and you know, we spent like, I think Victoria spent like years doing consultation to be able to establish, you know, the treaty assembly, the First Peoples Treaty Assembly, and also just about like we're talking about frameworks for negotiation and all that kind of thing. So I guess since 2016 in Victoria, from where the government committed to going into a treaty process, yeah, like they got the Treaty Assembly in 2018, I think, and that means that there's elected officials, and it's really similar to, you know, what's proposed in the upcoming referendum for a voice to Parliament. And the elections in Victoria are really exciting because you get to see blackfellas going up for election and hearing what's important to mob around the state, and it's just so lovely. It's just actually just beautiful politic, I guess, to see our mob running to be in the Treaty Assembly. And then we also have like the Uruk Commission, which is like the truth-telling part. And I guess what my thing is around making sure that we secure, the proper consultation process, and also like, you know, committing to truth-telling and all those sorts of things. And obviously, like, I can't talk about, you know, what's most important. I think that there's so many things that are being pushed to the wayside again and again and again for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people around the country. And there is, like, you know, Janine was talking about people's medications and electricity and things like that is, you know, really, really important. And that's human rights, you know. And yeah, I don't think I could pinpoint it, but I guess like I did just want to, you know, touch on before like we wrap up, because I am a, like, you know, campaigner, community organizer, and I was just thinking, because I work for Australian Progress, and we did a research called Passing the Message Stick about the upcoming referendum and transformative change. And one thing that we found in the research is that, you know, lots of the campaigns are targeted at, you know, changing the minds of people that know. And I really, really encourage people to talk to people that are undecided. And that is where you will have really great conversations. Because if someone tries to convince me to vote no, then it's it's dead wall. It's nothing's going to come from that. It's really a waste of their time. And I guess it would be the same for us that are approaching people that are voting no. And I think that's just really important for us as blackfellas to respect, the no mob in particular, and respect their decision that, this might not be enough, and want bigger change. And it's just, I don't know, I feel like we're getting closer and closer, and I think it's just really important that we talk to people that are undecided, or as we say they're persuadable, and talk to people that you also agree with, but just use those people as a way to practice what's important to you and your values, and what your shared vision is for the future. Because blackfellas around the country want to talk about this, and lots of blackfellas are yes, but also undecided as well. It's a mixed bag, but it is really important to talk to your undecided people and talk to your family and friends.
Tarneen, we appreciate that, and certainly appreciate everyone's time. I know we have run out of time, so I am going to bring it to a close and provide some closing comments. Thank you everyone that's joined us today. Really appreciate it, you taking your time out. This has been a good discussion, and I think there's been lots of information that's really useful for people leading into October 14. The Lowitja Institute, we do fully support constitutionally enshrined Aboriginal Torres Islander voice. We get right behind it. It is very much testament to the work that we've been doing for many years. We call on everyone to vote yes in the upcoming referendum. I just want to touch on a couple of things, and there's mentioned in the Q&A around the third clause very quickly. Yes, it does mean that the Australian Parliament can change that legislation. It doesn't mean that a party can change that legislation. There's a distinction there, that it has to go through full parliamentary processes. It isn't just up to the Labor or the Liberal government of the day to determine what that legislation looks like. It has to go through the entire Parliament to get voted on. So that's why we're progressing. That's why it's progressing that way. The other thing I want to mention before we close off is that the Lowitja Institute itself, and it's a quick plug, that we are actually hosting a member session starting from 1:30. So that's going to start very shortly. And so members who are wanting to have some further discussions, once you've jumped off this one, happy for you to jump on there to then have some conversations about further pieces. Also wanted to mention that we're about to release a report later today, which is called Better Outcomes and Value for Money with a Seat at the Table. And it's a piece of work that we've commissioned at the Lowitja Institute that focuses on the debate that's been running around Indigenous expenditure, and goes into the detail in relation to how much is actually spent in community, how much influence do Aboriginal people have on government expenditure, and what that then looks like, and the reason why we need a voice, because it does show that very little of government expenditure that we do have voice over. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that, and specifically to one of those questions that was in the chat box around the justice system. Some of the examples we use in there do focus on success and innovation that already exists in community control organisations in the justice area, and how we can use the voice to scale those things up to look at success right across the country. So thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate it. I know we've gone over time. You can find more information at the Uluru Dialogues website and the S23 website. That's it for us today. and certainly look forward to catching up with you guys into the future. And looking forward to October 15, when we can celebrate a momentous occasion. Thanks very much, guys. See ya.